why Pakistan has lagged behind India and Bangladesh. Life magazine carried a cover story predicted within 6 months Pakistan would collapse. During next 40 years, Pakistan became one of the top 10 developing countries in the world. 25 years, 12 prime ministers, and we didn't have any continuity of the policies. India is adding 12 million people to the labor force every year. Bangladesh has done very well.
I don't think we have had any economic policy. Central bank has created 7 crises of the exchange rate. What is the reform agenda that we require in Pakistan?
Why there is an NOC from Irrigation Department? Because sometimes in the 1930s, the Ravi Canal was flowing in front of the mall, and therefore that NOC was still required.
We have Dr. Ishrat Hussain here, and Dr. Saab, both you and I will lament Multani students, and we will go back and tell people in Lahore and Karachi and places that Multani students don't have the capacity to listen. But that's besides the point. Let's move on. As you were just told, Ishrat Saab needs no introduction. Ishrat has been around for a long time. He has been the governor of the central bank, director of IBA, recently minister for economic reform. He's done everything. And mashallah, he's now come up with the book, Development Pathways. Just published. I just got hold of a copy. I haven't read it yet. Looks interesting. Ishrat Saab, it's up to you how you want to run this session. I would suggest, if you can, very briefly introduce the book. Tell us the motivation. Why did you choose the topic? I know you've got some co-authors. We can give them credit too. Ishrat has got 3 or 4 people, young people who worked with him. And why do you think this important book is important for Pakistan? Why would you recommend everybody read it? Please, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Nadeem, for inviting me to this conversation, which I wanted Nadeem to be the person because he's very provocative, and I hope that we will all benefit from this conversation. For the last few years, there has been a lot of discussion, both informally as well as formally, as to why Pakistan has lagged behind India and Bangladesh. And because you're all young students, you were not even born, so I wanted to give an evidence-based analysis of the 3 countries' economic and social developments since the partition of 1947. And I'll start with the situation in Pakistan. Pakistan was one of the most backward regions of the undivided India. It was agrarian in nature, with very low productivity of agriculture crops even. The per capita incomes were much lower than India, and the poverty rates were higher than India. It was same country, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And it did not receive a single dime from the reserves of the undivided India. The Reserve Bank of India kept the money all to themselves. And even today, Pakistan's balance sheet, that amount is shown as our claim on Reserve Bank of India. We inherited 100 civil servants from the ICS, including Nadeem's father, who was an ICS officer. And they established a government from scratch in Karachi. They didn't have the stationery, didn't have the pens, they didn't have anything to start with. And the salaries were not paid by the government, but paid by the industrial tycoons who had migrated from India, the Habib family and the Adamji family, because the government of Pakistan had no money at this point. Life magazine, which was one of the very illustrious weekly of the United States, carried a cover story with Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah on the cover page and predicted that within 6 months, Pakistan would collapse because it's not economically viable, and this will revert to India, and India will once again become an integrated nation. 8 million refugees who were displaced from India were rehabilitated in this region, which is one-fourth of the population of this country. That was the start of this country. And during next 40 years, and this is the documentation which you will find in this book, Pakistan became one of the top 10 developing countries in the world, with 6 to 6.5% growth rate over a period of time, despite 5 shocks which we incurred. One, I mentioned, was the rehabilitation of 8 million refugees, one-fourth of the population. The second was the 1971 separation of East Pakistan into Bangladesh and Pakistan as Pakistan today stands. Third was nationalization of all our educational institutions, our industries, our banks, our financial institutions by Mr. Bhutto under a socialist regime, and the complete abolition of the civil service of Pakistan as it stood, with the security of tenure and security of job and merit-based comparative system, and brought in the lateral entry. And finally, we had the Afghan war, in which we played, a very major role along with the United States. Despite these 5 very tremendous shocks, Pakistan's poverty declined tremendously. India and Bangladesh were growing by 3 and 3.5%, and their poverty remained stagnant because those countries were still following the commanding heights of the economy to be controlled by the state. It was the state-controlled planning and allocation of resources, while Pakistan, except the 1970s, carried out a more liberal economic policies depending on the private sector. And a lot of people do not know that the development policy paper of the World Bank, which I researched and found out, at that time I was not in the World Bank, that Pakistan's manufactured exports in 1969, and this is a country where there were no industries in 1947, were higher than those of the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And look at those countries where they are today and where we are. So I just wanted to give this perspective because from 1990, the fortunes have reversed. And the fortune is that India and Bangladesh have gone way ahead of Pakistan, where their per capita income, we had 60% of Bangladesh and 40% of India higher than, ours was higher than theirs. Today it's the reverse. And our growth rate has declined between 3.5% to 4%, while India and Bangladesh are going at almost 6 to 7% per annum. And the social indicators were very, very positive in Bangladesh more than India. So the question, Nadeem, I wanted to explore as to what were the driving forces of the paradigm shift in the development strategy, which was followed by India and Bangladesh in order to achieve this. And I must confess that it was a decision taken in 1991 by Narasimha Rao, who was a weak prime minister, when IMF program had to be undertaken for the first time in India after a long time when they had a balance of payment crisis. So instead of just doing the Band-Aid, the Indian government decided to make a paradigm shift in their development philosophy from a dismantling the license Raj, which was where you can locate your investment, how much you can allocate, what salaries you can pay. If you want to expend, you need NOCs, as you were talking this morning. They dismantled that. They entered the global economy and said, trade liberalization and participation in international trade is what we want to do. They attracted the foreign direct investment, which was an anathema for Indians under Jawaharlal Nehru's socialist policies. They unshackled the private sector and allowed the private sector to produce, trade, exchange, and distribute goods and services, which was being done by the public sector monopolies at that time. And the beauty of Indian experiment was that the Indian businesses and the foreign investors did not wake up till Mr. Vajpayee, who was from the opposition BJP, became the prime minister and decided that he's going to continue the same reforms but go even further as far as the divestiture of the public enterprises is concerned. And then you have Manmohan Singh, who was the architect of the 1990 fund reforms. And then you had this Modi, who further was very friendly to the private sector. And in Bangladesh, after the Mujib's death, there were a lot of military coups which created instability in Bangladesh. And when Hasina Wajid and Khalda Zia came to power, they were battling Begums, but they continued the economic policies with consistency and predictability, and the private sector went up. So that is where we differ from India and Bangladesh, that we had 25 years, 12 prime ministers, and we didn't have any continuity of the policies. And every government came in and started with a scratch zero. And as you pointed out, the footprint of the government and the structure of our institutions has decayed as compared to what it was in the first 40 years. So the motivation was to show the efficacy and importance of structural reforms which are needed in Pakistan in order to get out of this 25, 26 IMF programs and become a very active participant in the global economy. So that was the purpose. So there's a lot of data which we had to construct from the scratch because some of the data was not comparable. World Bank database, as you know, goes up from 1960, but we had to construct the data. And what you would appreciate, and a lot of faculty members will appreciate, there are PhD scholars are very good in going in deep into the problem that they are solving, but they don't have a broader picture to contextualize what they were doing. And therefore, by involving the 3 PhD scholars who worked directly under me, and I assisted them, they have developed a much broader understanding of the entire canvas of the economic decision making. So it is my contribution to the younger generation of economists so that they can do a much better job when they assume the positions of responsibility. So that was their motivation also.
Ishad Sahab, you're also aware of the fact that India itself is divided on the success of India. For example, Ashoka Modi has just written a book on how the Indian miracle is flawed. Kaushik Basu has also written about it. Raghuram Rajan is also a bit conflicted. I know some of the Indians, for example, Surjit Bulla was here with us a few weeks ago. He's a total defender of the Modi regime. But there are a number of detractors too, that India has not gone as far as it would. And the question of whether India will overtake China is still unclear. Second thing is, it's also not very clear to me whether Indian, Bangladesh, whether we are statistically that different right now. Yeah, they're slightly ahead, but it's not very clear. Thirdly, you put a lot of emphasis on the Manmohan Singh, Manmohan Singh, yeah? Manmohan Singh and Montague thing. But again, there has been a lot of build-up in India all the way from the very beginning. If you recall India's human capital indicators, they built the IITs contrary to the advice of the international consultant. The international, I remember George Zakharopoulos in those days, you remember, in the World Bank, he used to argue for primary education, no university education. The big anathema to lend to universities, but Nehru went the other way. And then, of course, India had the big
Yeah.
brain drain too. So I don't know. I mean, what are we learning in terms of the three experiments?
Yeah.
Because I would also argue, why pick on these three? Why not, for example, pick on the Middle Eastern countries? Pakistan has a lot of commonality with the Middle Eastern countries. Why not Iran and UAE, etc.?
That I want to clarify. This was a natural economic union with a common history, with a common culture, with integrated infrastructure, common laws. Therefore, making comparison between the three countries was much better. Although I make a comparison with East Asia, which has disparate, economic systems, very different histories, different linguistic groups, different ethnic groups, but they have done extremely well. And as you know, 55% of the trade is intra-regional trade, as compared to Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, where a natural economic union has disintegrated and the intra-regional trade is only 5%. So you cannot make that kind of comparison. Now I come first to your point of the critics. If you look at my chapter on India, I say pain points and risks. And one of the pain point and risks is that the regional, gender, and income inequalities of India have really sharpened after the 1991 reforms. You have more billionaires, and the top 20% of deciles of the population control 50% of the national income, while the bottom 50% control only 20% of the national income. The Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Odisha have per capita incomes of 1/3 or 1/2 of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Telangana. So you have regional disparities. And to my great surprise, India's labor force participation rate of females is exactly the same as Pakistan, 23%, while Bangladesh is now 38%, which is the highest in the region. So you look at gender, you look at the whole question of regional, because it's 1.4 billion, and most of the people live in northern India as compared to southern India, and look at the income disparities. So I'm quite concerned about this whole widening gap, which can also lead to some kind of social tension. Having said that, on the question of human capital, I am also worried that 80% of the employment in India, despite everybody claims the very high human capital indicators, is 80% of this is in informal sector, not in the formal sector. And you know from Arthur Lewis' growth theory that unless you have a reallocation of the factors of production from the low productivity to the high productivity, you will not have a sustained growth over time. And India is actually doing low productivity agriculture to low productivity informal sector in the urban areas. And that is not a very sustainable proposition in my view. The third point, which is on human capital, McKinsey carried out a study and they showed that 10% of the engineering and IT graduates coming out of the Indian institutions are global in class. And that's what you see the CEOs of the Microsoft or Google and Adobe, they're all from IITs and IIMs. 40% or 50% are employable in India, and 50% are unemployable. So you have a distribution of Indian talent which is skewed, not in favor of the top notchers. And why do I say that? India is adding 12 million people to the labor force every year. Like us, it's a young population growth country. And the entire IT industry, which is a $200 billion industry with $150 billion of exports, is got 5 million employees in all. Now you tell me, where are these 12 million people going to be absorbed? That is a huge question. And so Ashok Modi, Kashif Basu, Arvind Subramaniam, Raghuraj Rajan, they are of the same view, which I have documented in this book. To that extent, you're right. But we exaggerate the human capital indicators of India. In my view, Bangladesh has done extremely well because of the female empowerment and the female labor force participation rates. The corollary benefits of this is you have birth spacing, so the population growth rate in Bangladesh has gone down. You have better education of the kids. You have better nutrition for the children, even for the females, which is not the case in Pakistan or India. You have cleanliness and drinking water, which is boiled water, free of parasites, so you don't have the diseases which used to be. And then I served in Bangladesh before it became Bangladesh. We had cyclones and floods, and they have managed these disasters management by raising the population shelter homes away from the vulnerable areas, and they've invested in the disaster management and the climate change. So if you look at their record, both on the human side as well as on the climate change and the environmental disaster, and also on the income inequalities, I think Bangladesh has done very well. And let me clarify something. Bangladesh government is not as honest or efficient as Pakistani government, so almost the same. But the social development was carried out not by the government, but by NGOs. Professor Yunus, who got the Nobel Prize for the microfinance, provided the money to the women in the rural areas. Then BRAC under Sir Fazal Hassan Abid carried out all the network of the primary schools as well as the clinics over the rural areas. And that is the contribution where the public sector, the private sector, and the civil society NGOs work together. You have win-win situation.
So what is it that we learn? By the way, you mentioned that we were one unit. I think many of us would contend that India and Pakistan have a commonality in history. It's Hassan, for example, wrote a very interesting book, not a great scholarly piece, but an interesting book on the Indus saga. And, we do think that we are slightly different. India is a heterogeneous country. And in fact, we may have commonalities with the North, but we certainly have no commonality with Bangladesh or Bengal, and we certainly have no commonality with the South. So I think we make a lot about our commonality with India. I don't know if you agree or not. The second thing is that the way you describe it, it seems that all three countries have really not broken out of the poverty trap. We are still kind of half-heartedly nudging our nose up, but really not made it. So if you're trying to draw any differences between the three and what lessons we learn, I'd like you to focus a little bit on what lessons do we get from the book in terms of what the three different parts are, if at all they are.
I have 8 critical success factors, and because of the paucity of time, I won't go into this. But to me, the whole idea of ideological predilections which dictated the economic policies and management has disappeared in the three countries. If you ask me, that is a very positive movement which is giving you a pragmatic approach. And as things change, both externally and internally, you fine-tune that and you adapt your economic policies according to that. And that requires the continuity of economic policies, which Pakistan has not done. So that is the distinction between the bad outcome of the Pakistani economic and social indicators that has to do with the lack of the economic policy continuity, because every regime wants it. The second lesson, I would say, is that investment in human capital, financial inclusion, and female empowerment are critical if you want inclusive and sustained growth. In the knowledge economy, you have to compete with the rest of the world, and if you don't have people who are quite equipped with the skill set which are in demand in the whole world, I think we will have serious difficulties. The third critical sector is that closed economies who shut their doors and do not allow the foreign trade, the investment flows, the migration of their labor, and technology transfer are going to suffer a great deal. It is the openness of the economy, getting good ideas and adapting them to your own environment, exchanging your goods, particularly your exports, which are able to bring in the competitive spirit in the enterprises and also the productivity of your labor force. If you combine that, then you are going to go places. In Pakistan, during the early 2000s, 80% of the imports were financed by exports because export was a very high growth area at that time. Today, it is 40% of the imports are financed by our exports. So we have got an anathema against imports, and therefore we have high tariff rates, and the high tariff rates means protection to the domestic industries who are seeking rents rather than competing in the whole world. So that is a lesson which I would very much recommend. And all things said and considered, the ideas that we should keep the foreigner or foreign investment or foreign people coming to the country, which is espoused by so many people in the country, is not going to help you. This is a global village, and we are all competing with each other. And there should be a complete flow of the ideas, people, and of investment in order to benefit from each other. So those are some of the lessons which I would say come out from this 75-year of history of these three countries.
But let's go into what you said earlier. You said that that we've had no continuity of policy. India has had continuity of policy. I would phrase it slightly differently. I don't think we have had any economic policy. I think they told us sign PEPRA, we signed PEPRA. They told us sign IPP, we signed IPP. They told us sign PRGF, we signed PRGF. Please, you've been in policy circles, please tell me. Where have we had policy in this country? For example, you've been the head of central bank. Central bank to date has never understood exchange rate policy. Central bank has created 7 crises of the exchange rate over the last so many decades. Each crisis we've had a sharp deterioration, and then we floundered to grab this exchange rate, which is what we are doing again. So history repeats itself because you never seem to learn. Secondly, I don't know where policy is made in Pakistan. I think you and I both know that in India, Montek and his people are very well entrenched. Even today, economic policy, there's an economist cadre that is actually doing economic policy, and they have a weight. I mean, Rakesh Mohan, etc. You know all those people. I don't have to name them. And there is a debate on economic policy. We don't have that. Would you agree? Is it the lack of economic policy, lack of economic debate, or is it the policy continuity that worries you?
Well, Nadeem and I have consistently disagreed on his characterization of, the donors and the DMG.
Fair enough.
That is his model, and I respect his model. But let me say something. The Indian Administrative Service of Generalists is even today powerful in India. Montek Ahluwalia remained deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, but he was always being given support by Manmohan Singh against the finance secretary of the government.
Sorry, a little correction.
Yeah.
Montek was finance secretary before deputy.
No, but I'm
secretary.
talking of when he became the deputy chairman under Manmohan Singh. The finance secretary...
When he wrote his famous M document, he was the finance secretary.
No, that is before that. I'm talking of the case when he was deputy chairman Planning Commission. it was Manmohan Singh who came to his rescue. The central bank in India has been run by Subramaniam, Bimal Jalan, V.C. Reddy. They are all from the finance ministry. I resisted when my successor was being appointed. I resisted the appointment, and Ashfaq knows that nobody from the Ministry of Finance should come in just for the optics, because the Ministry of Finance, except the debt office and special secretary, were all civil servants. So what business do they have to come to the central bank? Now, central bank had only one PhD in economics when I took over, Nadimul Haq, and we used to have piles of red ribbon files on our files. I'm proud to say that we had a program of sending our people anywhere in Pakistan who got admission for PhD in top 20 economics departments all over the world. And today there are 29 PhDs, the highest number of PhDs in economics in the central bank. We have a completely, files are no longer valid for a very long time. Everything is paperless. All the databases are integrated databases. We have dynamic websites. We have all kind of systems which are talking to each other, and all the banks have actually carried out that. The first successful computerization program of $30 million given by the World Bank was completed in 2005. And that led to the computerization of the entire banking sector. And you know this, 80% of our assets, the banking assets, were in the hands of the public sector nationalized banks, where all the loans were being given on the basis of political patronage and cronyism. Today, 80% of the bank's assets are in the hands of the private sector. They are contributing 200 billion rupees every year as a corporate profit tax. It is sad that during my time, 17% of the private sector credit was going to SMEs, 8% to agriculture, and 6-7% to the consumer financing for the middle class, salaried class. Today, the banks are lending only to the government because, as Ashfaq pointed out to you, your net federal transfers are not sufficient in order to take care of your interest payments. So the government has to borrow. So the fault is not of the banks, but of the government. Now, on the exchange rate, with due modesty, I would say that I inherited, right after the 1998 bomb blast, when the accounts of $11 billion were frozen, the reserves were $300 million. And when I left, the reserves had gone up to $30 billion, and the exchange rate remained stable in a range of 58 to 62, because I was not artificially defending the rate. I had hands off completely, but I had to sterilize the inflows because $5 billion were coming in as a foreign direct investment every year. So I had a lot of money. It would resulted into Dutch disease. Therefore, I had to carry out sterilization. So the exchange rate was freely market oriented. I introduced the exchange rate policy in consonance with the IMF program, which was no intervention by the government. And I'm quite proud, for 6 years, the exchange rate remained stable.
Okay, let's return to the book. I didn't mean to sort of make it seem as I was attacking the central bank, not at all. I was just making a very simple point that despite all these efforts, we've still got an inflation rate of 30%, a central bank that's still rigging the exchange rate, that's still got all kinds of problems, and that we have 6 deep currency crises that we've written about. And our reserves have always remained below 3 months of imports. We borrowed left, right, and center to show reserves. Right now, our reserves are negative. Even then, our reserves are negative. We put borrowed reserves up there to show we've got reserves. We've got no reserves. But let's leave all that aside for a moment. Let's just focus on the book. What do we learn in terms of our reform agenda? For example, you've been the reform czar for the last 5 years. Please tell us what should be our reform agenda. I know you and I disagree on this. of course. We disagree on a lot of things, but of course, that's the whole point. We should disagree. And I'd like to discuss with you what our reform agenda should be, because I think one point that I was making earlier too, I think where we economists have failed, and we have failed, I put myself on the hook too. We failed because we have not been able to identify a reform agenda. We point fingers at India, we point fingers here, we point fingers there, but hand waving won't do it. What is the reform agenda that we require in Pakistan? What does your book tell us from this free thing?
Look, your PID growth strategy encompasses in greater detail all what we have been saying. All my writings on reform, you know, I see them reflected in your own agenda for growth. So we don't have any disagreement on the contents of the economic policies and structural policies. Where we differ is the mode of implementation. You argue of a shock therapy effect, that the entire civil service structure should be completely abolished and a new structure come in its place. Now, my argument is that you have to run the country, and therefore the pace and the sequencing of reforms should be such that the entire country should not suffer because of this shock therapy. But your argument and my argument, the end result is the same. We don't want the generalists to control our economic, strategic, defense, all other policies. I created, as you know, you were a member of my task force, we created 4 clusters. One for economic ministries, one for technical ministries, one for social sector, and one for the general management. And anybody from the cadre or ex-cadre or non-cadre government officer can compete for those positions, and it is no entitlement, no reservation. Where it happens, because the summary for all these reforms for implementation come from the same persons who are losing their entitlements. So what are they going to do? They are going to make resistance. And they win over the politicians, and the politicians say, we are hand in gloves with them. And that is what my lesson from the 3 years of the government was. That yes, the Prime Minister wanted to do something, but when it came to the cabinet did not go through this. So your specialization of the civil servants, lack of entitlements, of your perks, as the chairman of the Pay and Pension Commission, you know that we recommended monetization of all perks, including the housing and transport, and merging that into a salary package. But that also was not approved. We have a pension reforms where we said that pay as you go is going to create a bomb explosion in the near future because our liabilities are rising. So we should go from defined benefits to defined contribution, which is you and I get our pensions from that defined contribution. Therefore, these are some of the reforms where we would like the country to specialize in the subject matter domain, and the policymakers should not be just a generalist. That, I think, is what the entire institutional infrastructure in this country has weakened, has decayed because of the politicization of the civil service as well as the lack of the subject matter expertise and knowledge, and we have to shift from there. So that is the starting point, because we have good papers, good plans. I came to comment on the growth strategy which you had made when you were deputy chairman, you had organized a seminar. Now, if we had just implemented that growth strategy, today we would have been in a very different situation. But we don't implement things. We write beautiful papers on our own even, not even given by the donors or the development partners, but our difficulty is that we don't implement them. So my emphasis is we have to develop implementation capacity by bringing in people from outside also and let them participate in the policy making. It should not be the domain. And your efforts, I must commend, of bringing in the academia and the universities and the research institutions and the think tanks is really something I very much commend. It is a slow process, but I wish you the best of success that you are able to bring the academia and the think tanks into the policy-making domain.
So, here, I mean, let's look at the civil service, for example. We don't disagree much on that. It's a 19th century civil service. It still has files that are tied up with strings. We still have to put in paper, sextuplicate, triplicate, whatever, paper. We carry papers. The one thing that I think we can agree on, but I don't think any of our economists agree, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we are still tied into this poverty and all that other stuff. One thing that we can agree on, Montague's M memo, whatever that famous M memo, which is simple, get rid of the NOCs.
Correct.
Now, we've been yelling for NOCs for the last so many years. Hell, is that too much of a reform? Are you saying that's a drastic reform? It will destroy the system if you get rid of the NOCs?
No.
Why can't we get rid of the NOCs?
You're absolutely right.
And related to that, I also put in this, we had a discussion on this when we were in the task force. Why can't we get rid of the principal accounting officer?
All right.
There are 5 principal accounting officers that run the country.
No.
Would you agree with me this is the most centralized country in the world?
Right.
Is India that centralized? Is Bangladesh as centralized as Pakistan?
Let me answer your first question first. We had a regulatory guillotine work in conjunction with the private sector. We even do not know how many rules and regulations exist at the federal level, at the provincial level, and at the local level. And you're absolutely right. When I was in the State Bank of Pakistan, Bank Al-Falah was constructing a tall building within the Shah Alam at the mall. And you know, they needed 36 NOCs and clearances. And lo and behold, one of the NOC was from the irrigation department. So I asked why there is an NOC from irrigation department. Because sometimes in the 1930s, the Ravi Canal was flowing in front of the mall, and therefore that NOC was still required. So what we created was a regulatory guillotine, and we said we have to completely eliminate all these unnecessary NOCs and clearances and also permits and rules. But then the government changed, and I don't know what has happened, but what has survived, and I think Manzoor is not here, but he will tell you, Manzoor is here. He will tell you that Pakistan single national window is going to do exactly what you are recommending as far as the international trade is concerned. You know how much corruption takes place in our seaports and airports and the dry ports. At the national single window, it's all computerized. You only go and upload your documents, and the AI will process that, and it will circulate among all the different agencies, and the results will be communicated to the individual, and there's no human interaction. And that is going to create a lot of difference as far as our international trade competitiveness is concerned. So
I hope so. I've heard this many times. But the tragedy is that we still have, when you set up for example, if you want to set up a building of flats, you still need 4 years of NOCs. For example, you want to build a house, simple house on a plot. You need a year of NOCs. If you want a school, you need 10 NOCs.
Right.
The problem is, for God's sakes, can we at least agree on this? Economists can't even agree on this. When we say get rid of the NOCs, economists say, no, but you see, let's measure poverty. Poverty has increased. What is poverty? So poverty will increase if we have NOCs. For example, tell me another thing. Street vending. Why do we have a huge problem with street vending? And economists, when I tell them street vending, this is too small, don't worry about it, let's not have street vending. So please, let's not take the focus away from economists. Civil servants, principal accounting officer, please tell me, how do you defend principal accounting officer?
See, what we did was to say that the secretary of the ministry doesn't know the working of all the autonomous bodies and the attached departments. So we changed the rules of business and we said, just to give an example, the vice chancellor of PIDE knows his organization, he knows the needs, and he is the decision maker. So give him one line item of budget and let him decide how he's going to allocate.
There are Mike, madam,
and he will be the principal accounting
Mike
officer. He should be the principal accounting officer. And from all the secretaries, we were able to get 40 institutions which today have their own principal accountant. And you were included in that list. All the universities were included in the list, that all the vice chancellors will be the principal accounting officer. After I left, I don't know what happened.
I'm sorry.
But that is a recommendation.
It has not happened.
Oh, it didn't happen.
It has not happened. And section officer runs PIDE.
Right.
Section officer run universities. I've talked to vice chancellors. Section officers tell them when they can go to a conference and they can't go to a conference, which cars should they send to the marriage of which section officer. So for God's sakes, this kind of centralization.
Sure.
NEPRA is run by the secretary, whatever. So I think, quite frankly, let's at least agree. Is it too drastic a change?
No, this
to
is
get
fine.
rid of the principal accounting
No, but
officer?
we did this. You see,
No, but it's not happened.
No,
I mean, it's
it
useless to say we did. Somehow
it happened in some
we did it.
cases. I said it happened in 40 cases.
Not a single university.
It happened in 40 cases. It didn't happen in others.
Ashfaq Sahab,
But that is, you're right, that it should have happened for all of them. But it depends also on the individual in the ministry. If the secretary is very possessive, he doesn't want to get rid of it. If I were the secretary, I will say, good riddance. It's no longer my accountability. It is accountability of the VC PIDE. Let him face the Public Accounts Committee. I don't have to face.
Okay.
So it makes sense to me.
So basically, we exist, as they say, on the swabdeed of the secretary. How do you translate that in English? That the secretary will decide how to run the system. And there are 5 secretaries that run this country. Would you agree with me? There are 5 secretaries who run the principal, PSPM, finance secretary, and secretary interior, whatever, the others don't count. So I think this is a huge degree of centralization that we should confront. India doesn't have that centralization.
No, the cabinet secretary there is very powerful. And under Modi government, I must tell you that the PS to the Prime Minister for the first time takes all the decisions, and all the secretaries first consult him before they write any proposals. Okay. So there has been re-centralization in India, like Pakistan, which is not very good. And I totally agree with you that it's not only the decentralization from the PM office, but also the CM office in the provinces. The CM principal secretary and the CM secretariat never used to exist. I was a deputy secretary in Sindh government during Mr. Bhutto's time. Mr. Bhutto had only one principal secretary, and all the files would go to the principal secretary. He would not write any notes or comments, and it will be brought to the notice of the Prime Minister. He was just a post office. When I joined the Imran Khan government, there were deputy secretaries in the PM office who used to write notes on the proposals sent by the 22 grade officers who were the secretaries to the ministry. And I said, this is ridiculous. How can a deputy secretary have the knowledge or the expertise or the experience? Either don't hire those 22 grade officers if you don't trust them. So I totally agree with you that there is now a centralization which is not only at the PM office, but it is also at the Chief Minister's office. And it has to go. And the whole question of the local government has not been on debate. And I would recommend you, Nadeem, to have this debate. Because we have given the NFC award to the provinces, and what have they done? They have expanded their workforce at the provinces. They have 150% increase in the executive allowances for their employees. They are not giving money to the teachers, to the health workers, to the people who are doing the technical work. This has to go to the district governments. District governments should be completely autonomous. They should hire their own people. They should have experts who are running and they should be directly elected. So decentralization not only from the center to the provinces, but from the provinces to the local governments. That is the way we should actually cut down what you are describing as the right characteristics of this centralized system.
So let me turn to in another direction. Um, what has India done that is so good in terms of centralization or decentralization or management of resources differently, in terms of coordination of the government? For example, another thing that I see, maybe you don't agree there too, I've seen that the ECC, the Economic Coordination Committee, or as Arshad Zaman calls it very well, Exemptions and Concessions Committee, which committee, I don't know, I mean, it's a very strange committee. It just busts the budget every meeting. Every meeting, it destroys the budget. For 10 years, I've been counting the number of budget lines that it has crossed. And I've been sharing it with Hafiz and Shahid Kadar, etc. It can't coordinate anything. We can't coordinate anything. Would you agree that the ECC should go and we don't have any coordination in the government? What does India do better?
You're right. No, India has 29 states. 29 states raise 6 to 7% of the taxes from within the states, and only 6 to 7% is raised by the union government. So there's equality as far as the resources generation are concerned between the states, and here the provinces raise only 1% of GDP as taxes, while 9% is that of the FBR, but 60% of that divisible pool goes to the provinces. That is not the case in India. In India, the states are now competing with each other in order to attract investment, to provide incentives. So there is a decentralization. For example, Mr. Modi, when he was the chief minister of Gujarat, and Mr. Tata lost his license by West Bengal Communist Party to start the new car of the Tata Nano, Mr. Modi took Mr. Tata in his own car and went around Ahmedabad industrial area and said, "Tell me, which plot of land do you want for Tata Nano?" That is the kind of, power the state governments have. Here, although you have all the money giving to them, but still the ECC takes decisions on behalf of the provinces, which doesn't make sense. So we have, as you know, I'm against the fixation of these administered prices, but every government wants to have their own fixed prices, and the ECC cannot do anything. So you're right. We have a constitutional body called the National Executive Council, and you in the Planning Commission are in charge of that. That is a constitutional body in which the 4 chief ministers are the members along with the federal government. And there, all the technical work should be done by the Planning Commission, and the proposals of coordination should come before the NEC. ECC doesn't have the teeth or the mandate to do that. So that is my proposal of the economic side. On the non-economic matters, the coordination mechanism, according to the Constitution, is in the Council of Common Interests. You have Council of Common Interests in which the chief ministers are also represented. So you have a coordination body, but they are not being used. So the present mechanism, I agree with you, of having the ECC is not actually congruent with the actual power distribution between the federation and the provinces.
Questions before we close, because I think we're getting close. One is, and then obviously we should go to the audience too, yeah, I forgot. One quick question. Financial markets. What is it that we are doing so differently? Our stock market is dying.
Right.
Our stock market is now from 20% to almost 7 or 8% of GDP. Stocks are delisting. Suzuki is delisted, Unilever is delisted, stocks are delisting. New people don't want to come in. Our stock market is dying. Our banking system, we were all proponents of privatization. We were all very happy to see the privatization. But it hasn't paid off. The spreads are huge. The banks are still lending to the government. They're not lending anywhere else. They create no new instruments. They become a closed club. And the central bank, I hate to say it, has become like an enforcer of the club. When we ran into trouble on the exchange companies, we gave the exchange to the exchange market, the banks, to make extra profits, which I think is anti-market. We should have kept the exchange companies and let the banks compete. So
That's
what
true.
about our financial markets? What about, do we have financial markets
No,
in
we
this
don't
country?
have a debt capital market. But let me give one example from the time I was in the government. You know, I'm a culprit, and I confess that. I created these authorized agents for the government debt, that only these 10 authorized agents can compete in that. That is not really right. They collude among themselves. So when I got a chance in 2020, and you have now the Islamic banking instrument, which is called Sukuk, which is really like a PIB. So I said, I'm not going to float it only among these authorized dealers. I will open it up to the capital markets where individuals, net worth individuals, insurance companies, mutual funds, and all other financial institutions can compete with the banks. So the first issue of 200 billion was all with the banks, and it resulted in KIBOR plus 200 bips. When I floated this through the debt capital market, it was minus 20 bips below the KIBOR. So as you rightly say, there is a competition, there is no collusion, there are more participants, and the government is the winner as far as the pricing is concerned. So we should not have the PIBs and the T-bills only to the authorized dealers. We should go and open it up to the debt capital markets, and that will give the depth. And that will give confidence to the retail investor also, because the markets are not very deep. So they don't have some liquidity. So if they want to get out of the markets, they don't know whether they will be able to sell at a loss or a gain. So the depth and the liquidity of the markets will come in. On the equity market, the problem is that, these companies, despite the fact that the economy is not growing well, are making 20, 22% returns on equity. They are cash rich. So what are they doing? Rather than having a free float where you and I can buy their shares, they are buying back because they are liquidity rich. So that means that the competition is actually shrinking. And I think something has to be done in order to increase the competition in the equity markets. India has IPOs lined up for the whole year. Here we are very lucky if we get 4 or 5 IPOs in a year. So unless we have the new IPOs coming in, your equities markets are not just
But
going to...
we've looked at the PID and we've shown that Mahbubullah used to say there were 22 families who own the stock market. Today there are 31 families. And the boards of those families, we've done a network analysis of the boards. The boards are all members of Sindh Club. I exaggerate, but they're all members of Sindh Club.
You
so
exaggerate.
I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. The boards are Citibank, ex-City bankers. In fact, bankers are on boards. I mean, this is another reason. I keep telling you the economists lose out. That's why I say don't make economics a career. Bankers run boards, bankers run banks, bankers run DFIs. Hey, economists have no jobs at all. Bankers run the finance ministry. At the same time, the bankers collude with all the states, the private sector, who remain, and they don't want to put any equity. So, Ashfaq, I would also argue that an interest rate is too low. If we use Modigliani Miller, debt is equity is very expensive in this country. So, if Modigliani Miller is used, an interest rate should be 35%. Would you disagree?
No, but the premium, the equity premium in this country is still quite high.
Yes.
That is quite high, equity premium. Because of the, one good thing which has happened is that you have a control on the insider trading, because the members of the brokerage houses who were participating in the daily trade were also on the board of the stock exchange. That at least has gone. Now you have independent directors. To that extent, there is a reform as far as the equities market is concerned. But you're right. Uh, I was in Dhaka last week, and the number of retail investors in a market, in the stock market there, is 4 million individuals.
And we have 300,000.
And we have 300,000. And we are 220 million, 225 million people, and they are only 180 million people. So look at the what I call as the future potential of utilizing your stock market and the debt capital markets in order to mobilize resources. As I made this point in the book, that India and Bangladesh both have gone from 15% to 30% investment, which is all financed by the domestic savings, and we are stuck at 15%, and 8% is the domestic savings, and the 6% or 5% is the savings of our overseas Pakistanis, which counts as the national savings. So you are stuck in a low growth equilibrium of ICOR being, four.
What we've looked at, the footprint of the government is 80%. Where do I invest?
No, what I'm saying.
If the sludge,
Yeah.
the NOC market is there, if I invest anything, and people have done that, I can quote you examples. The FPR turns up and says, where the hell did you get your money from? I mean, come on, for God's sake, somebody's investing money. What do you want? So we want the black market to remain alive. We don't want people to invest. What kind of a regime is that?
No, but
how do we solve
you
that?
know, and you asked for the structural reforms. If you look at the list of structural reforms, I said don't overtax the formal sector of the economy. The manufacturing sector is paying 66% of all the taxes. You have 60% of the economy, which is, you said the footprint, I tell you 60% of the economy is outside the tax net. Retail trade, wholesale trade, real estate, informal private transport sectors, logistics companies, as well as agriculture. You combine them, I've done the calculation, and if you bring them the tax, your rates of corporate sector should go down. Your sale tax should go down.
Here we have another issue that needs to be discussed, which I was trying to discuss with the World Bank too. Why is it that all our economists think that we should tax the economy to death?
No.
Why? What about the footprint of the government? I mean, why can't the government be receded? For example, let me ask you a simple question, 3 questions, very simple question. What does this thing do? What does the trade body do? What is this trade body? जी क्या उसका नाम है? वो जो करती है trade, foreign trade करती है. Export Development Board. What the hell does it do? What does the Board of Investment do? What does the Pakistan Housing? There are tons of, you calculated the 500 agencies that do nothing. Why can't we get rid of them?
Yeah, we should get rid of them.
We've also calculated one more thing. Let me point out to you. We've calculated now what the cost of public servant is. Even a chaprasi costs us crores of rupees.
Yeah,
and these guys multiply this.
I saw that. Let's not get into that costing because I have different costing. But
fair enough, but we should get into it.
This
is another thing that I don't like. Economists always say, let's not get into it. And I'm saying this conversation is only for us to get into it.
No, but
how can we keep avoiding each other? We have to have a discussion.
I have published it. You have not quoted that study in your, what should I do then? I mean, you are not citing the report which I produced before the cabinet and the Pay and Pension Commission report, which cost the government servant. I've done that work, so I have got my data. Now you should use that data to contradict me or to come to a different conclusion. That's how the debate goes on. All right?
Sorry, hang on. Let's clarify that. This is the report that you did
the Institution Reform Cell.
15 years ago.
No, 2021.
2021.
It was cabinet.
There's a report. It's publicly available. Ashfaq Sahib, is it available?
It is on the website.
Okay, we will confront it.
Yeah.
We will confront it and you will confront our work.
Yeah.
The point is, I looked at your book. You have cited nothing from anybody. Not Hafiz Pasha nor anybody.
What?
Right? In this book. Nothing. I've checked everywhere.
Where?
Right? In this book.
I have.
No, there isn't. I've just checked it. Anyways, let's move on. Another question.
I have cited all the papers.
Another very interesting question. What about the PSDP? What do we do about the PSDP? What has India done that's different?
Oh, they have given all the states the powers to do the infrastructure, except for the interstate highways, which the union government is doing, all the railways, which is under the federal government, and the airports. But the rest of the infrastructure is being financed by the state governments themselves. So the federal government doesn't come in. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we have taken over the responsibility of providing development projects even for the provinces where the benefits of those projects will accrue exclusively to one particular province. And that I don't think is the right attitude. We should have only those projects which are connecting all the four provinces or which are of the public goods nature like pandemics or the health or climate change which are boundaryless. So I'm not very happy with the PSDP's composition for two reasons. One, the overthrow or throw forward of these goes up to 10 to 12 years. So you have a compositional problem. And second, your cost benefit ratio of these projects is all screwed up because you have spent everything on the cost overruns and you have foregone the benefits in the first 7, 8 years of the cost overruns. So for those two reasons, I criticize what the PSDP is doing.
What about the MNAs? Should they get?
No, they should not. That's why I say the local government should get it. The local governments should get the funds. They are elected representatives of the people, and they should decide what is needed for their own union councils, for their own tehsils, for their own districts, rather than somebody sitting in Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar, or Quetta. So this is what my
Okay, ji, this is a very
recommendation is.
interesting discussion. We could go on all night, but let's have 3 questions before we close. Folks, go ahead, ji. Inko de. नहीं आ रहा दूसरा दे दें भाई दूसरा
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Zubair here. Thank you very much
Ji.
for your session. Sir, first question is very simple like that. You have analyzed the data 1947 to 2023. What about your very summarized prediction? Are we going for the economic integration like India, Bangladesh and Pakistan? And the second thing I want to discuss here like that is our respected Nadimul Haq Saab defined about the financial markets. So you know that Pakistan Stock Exchange within the last 1.5 months, our index, KSE 100 index has boosted from almost 40,000 to it has crossed 57,000. So is it like a bubble? And because why I am asking, you know that our economic situation, country is, if any country is growing, I believe that the index should also be enhanced with that comparatively, not like a separate one. So both. Thank you very much, sir.
I mentioned earlier that the rate of return on equity in Pakistan listed companies is one of the highest. Last year, the profits of all the listed companies were 875 billion rupees. This year, they are 1 trillion rupees. So when you have this kind of rate of returns, naturally, your share prices are going to go up. Despite that, the PE ratio, the price equity ratio, is one of the lowest. So if you are a sharp speculator, you will enter the market at a very low price because you will earn a lot if you keep those shares. So that is the situation as far as the equity market is concerned. As far as economic integration is concerned, everybody who has done academic studies, policy studies, has come to the conclusion that it is a win-win situation for all the countries in the South Asia region. And the smaller countries derive much greater benefits being neighborly to a large economy, which is 80% of the GDP of the South Asia, 85% of the population. So if you look at the United States is not gaining so much from NAFTA or whatever it is called now as Mexico and Canada are getting. So if you have an economic market, the beneficiaries will be Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, not India as much. So that is an interest of these smaller countries to be integrated. Okay. Punjab of Pakistan and Punjab of India and Haryana and Delhi our integrated market. They don't have to buy the inputs from, Bombay or Calcutta. They can buy it from Lahore. And the Lahore business people can buy it from Amritsar and Jalandhar and from Haryana. So this is a natural flows of the goods and services.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Ashok sir. Sir, I have a question. Please, sir.
जी
सर आपने कहा कि फर्स्ट 40 इयर्स में हमारी प्रोग्रेस बहुत अच्छी थी. आपको नहीं लगता फर्स्ट 40 ईयर में हम पहले सेंटो का पार्ट है, फिर सेटो का पार्ट बने, फिर यूएसएस वॉर के अगेंस्ट जब अफगान वॉर हुई उसमें हम अमेरिका के अलाई थे, तो हमें बहुत ही ज़्यादा एड मिल रही थी. हमें ना सिर्फ यूएस से बल्कि वर्ल्ड बैंक, आईएमएफ से इतनी ज़्यादा एड मिल रही थी. इस वजह से हमारे इंडिकेटर इतने ज़्यादा पॉजिटिव थे. और आफ्टर द एटॉमिक बॉम्ब जब हमारे ऊपर सैंक्शंस लगी, फिर से हमारे वो ग्रोथ नीचे चली गई. लेकिन उसके बाद फिर जब 9/11 हुआ हमें फिर से एड मिलना शुरू हुई. हम वॉर का हिस्सा बने, वॉर अगेंस्ट टेरर का, फिर से हमारे इंडिकेटर्स अच्छे हो गए. मतलब जब जब हमें एड मिलती है हमारे इंडिकेटर्स बहुत अच्छे हो जाते हैं.
You are repeating the myth which exists. I believed in evidence. And if you go to my last book, Governing the Ungovernable, there is a chart which compares the aid flows of 60s, 70s, compare them, 80s and 90s, 2007, and 2008 to 2013. Actually, there are more flows in the period when the economy was declining. During Mr. Bhutto's period, we were not getting the Western aid, but we were getting from OPEC countries. Libya, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE were pumping money into this country, which was much higher than Ayub Khan's period. Yes, Afghan war during Zia brought in the flows. But during Nawaz Sharif's period, the World Bank and IMF and ADB and Japan were major donors. Plus, they froze $11 billion of the resident and non-resident accounts in order to finance the balance of payment. So it was much higher external financing compared to the 1980s. During 2000-2007, we got more money as our reimbursement of the Coalition Support Fund. It was our money which we were spending and the US was giving us. But between 2008 to 2013, we got the Kerry-Lugar bill, which gave us $1.5 billion every year. So you compare that, there is no significant difference between the periods when the economy was growing and the economy was, slowing down. So look at the chart, and then you make up your mind rather than listen to the talk shows and the myths.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर. Sir, almost all the worthy questions are being raised by Sir Nadeem, and the audience already have raised. So I just would like to comment on your all conversation. You presented two of the countries, Bangladesh and India, as the role model for their development.
No, I didn't.
You just praised some of their ways, or you may say that the switching of their methodology or system switching, which you think should be done in Pakistan as well. No?
I'm sorry, I don't want you to take a erroneous
Maybe
interpretation of my
wrong.
premise.
Ji.
What I said that first 40 years, Pakistan was doing
excelling.
extremely
Yes.
well.
Yes.
And then we became a laggard,
Ji, sir.
and India and Bangladesh took
Ji, sir.
precedence over us.
This is what I'm talking about, the
but
second
we are not
era.
making them role model,
no.
or we are not
No,
saying that
it's-
we should
No,
learn from them.
Actually, I am talking about those points which you talked that were good in their management or government or governance. As you said that Bangladesh growth is NGOs led, mainly NGOs played a very important role in their development. So sir, what about Pakistan? As sir talked about NCOs, and here even to run a simple small organization, NGO, we need so many restrictions, we need to follow so many NCOs. So what to follow and what to do?
Exactly what you're saying is right. that we should liberalize our licensing of the NGOs, allow them to do the work in the rural areas, in the backward districts of Pakistan, and be transparent. Now, we should not have the wives of the civil servants or the wives of the politicians taking lead in establishing NGOs for their pastime. That's not the NGOs. The NGOs are those who spend their time in Avaran or Musa Khel or Kohistan or others. They don't do that. So if they are doing that, I think they should be encouraged.
Abbas Musweek, can you please unmute yourself?
Gee, hello. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishrat. I appreciate you taking out the time. This has been very insightful, and congratulations on your book. I want to pivot slightly from economics to more governance and more towards your book. I wanted to ask about civil society in particular. Friedrich Hayek, as you know, his paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society, a seminal paper, big contribution to economics, in which he argues that the nature of knowledge is diffuse, context-specific, largely unarticulated, and so on and so forth. And his sort of takeaway from that was that you should remove the government from all domains of society and liberate the market. I slightly differ from that. I think we should instead have an approach where we liberate various mechanisms in place, such as unions, the farmers' associations, arts and culture, free speech association, devolution of power, of course, is in there as well. In your findings compared to India, how would you say their approach to civil society has made a difference to their growth and development over time? We seem to have this fixation on expertise today, which is also sort of equated to the neoliberal troika of privatize, deregulate, and liberalize. I think we should approach society in a manner where we have the mechanisms in place. Sure, go ahead. Thank you.
Vas, I know your views. Let me correct what I said. And the book says this whole debate of the binary state versus market is totally outdated. It is irrelevant to the rest of the discussion in the context of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. What you need is a strong, capable, effective government working with a comparative markets which are well functioning, no collusion, no connivance among the players, and the civil society and NGOs participating in the social development of the country. This partnership between the state, markets, and NGOs is what has taken East Asia up, what has taken Bangladesh up, although the India market and the state are now very much in partnership, and that has created, but the NGOs haven't played that role because India also has a firm hand policy on the NGOs. But the associations which you're talking about, if they are professional associations and not lobbying associations, then I'm with you. But my little experience of the 22 years in Pakistan show me that most of the associations, even the professional associations, are not talking about the national issues, but they're talking about the parochial issues which affect their own association or their own members. And if they change the role, I'm with you. I would say they are very powerful institutions which should be co-opted as the development partners.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I think we run out of time. We got a new book, wonderful. It's always good to welcome a new book in Pakistan because we have very little writing in Pakistan. So Ishrat Sahab, it's a pleasure to have you here. I think the way I look at Pakistan is slightly different. I think quite frankly, we haven't developed a society in this country. The more I look about it, Nayab has done this survey just now about social capital and trust, which I think is very important. We should go deeply into it. I think we really have not developed social capital and trust in the society. We talk about NGOs, for example. I'm always reminded of this, and I quote it very often, the famous book by de Tocqueville in the US, where he talked about the fact that the US people were capable of doing things on their own without the government. That's what made them, not necessarily the market, but the fact that they were able to do things themselves. And it's society's ability to do things themselves that's important. It's, for example, what McCloskey, we had Deirdre McCloskey on one of our webinars, and she's written this lovely book called Bourgeois Values, where she says value systems are very important. And what is our value system? I've been thinking about it. What is the concept of honor? Apart from killing a woman, what is the concept of honor? I really don't know. Do we have a concept of honor? Like, for example, Boris Johnson resigned because he held a party? Here it doesn't happen. So I think we really need to think, what is the concept of hard work? What is the concept of risk-taking? What is the ambition? I ask these kids about ambition. So I think we need to go much deeper into our society and figure out where we are going. I mean, the average Indian kid that I meet in the plane or anywhere, he's got ambition. He's going to do things. Our kids, I talked to them yesterday, and they say, no, we don't have that. So I think I'm glad we had this conversation. I think we need much deeper. That's why we hold these conferences. We need a much deeper conversation, all of us. We owe it to the kids to have these deep conversations and ask each other tough questions and begin to ask tougher questions of ourselves. What have we done in the society? Quite frankly, we inherited this part. I don't know how. I know lots of people talk about it. I won't go there. But I think we held seminars with Aisha, Jalal. We'll hold webinars with these people. What have we got? I don't know. What have we formed as national things? But these are deep issues. We'll go into them further. Thank you, Shasab. Thank you very much. Folks, please read this book.